perceptions of Jesus, and sometimes people like one more than another. I don't know. I was thinking of this Will Ferrell movie. Have you ever seen the Will Ferrell movie Talladega Nights? I think it's subtitled The Story of Ricky Bobby, a NASCAR driver. And there's one scene in the movie. He's sort of a typical Will Ferrell character, sort of egotistical, funny in so many ways. But there's one scene where he's praying. And he starts praying, his family is there, he's saying grace before dinner, and he says, "Little baby Jesus, thank you for this food," and "Little baby Jesus," and he kept repeating, "Little tiny baby Jesus." His wife sort of stops him in the movie and says, "Jesus did grow up. He wasn't always just a little baby at Christmas time." And he said, "Well, I'm saying grace. And if I want to say little baby Jesus, I can say it. And when you say grace, you can talk to teenage Jesus, you can talk to bearded Jesus. But when I say grace, I'm going to talk to little baby Jesus. Because I like him best." Do you know, he felt very comfortable with little baby Jesus because, everybody loves a little child. It's sort of a baptism, thinking of that. Little Mason here, so cute. He looked out, had a smile on his face, looking out at everybody. Usually they do. Do you know, my text this morning is this passage from Mark chapter 1, and Jesus is calling his first disciples. We had in the background that Jesus was teaching by the Sea of Galilee, and the first 4 disciples who went in following Jesus were fishermen. And there's Simon and his brother Andrew. Simon later changed his name to Peter. There's James and John, the sons of Zebedee. And all 4 of them were fishermen. And Jesus, after they had heard him talk and speak a little bit, Jesus came up to them one day and said, "Follow me, and I'm going to make you fishers of men." Follow me, and I'm going to make you fishers of men. They were about fishing. They knew fishing. But they dropped their nets, and they followed Jesus. Have you ever thought about those disciples making that decision to drop their nets and follow Jesus? Have you ever quit a job on a whim? Anybody out there quitting a job on a whim? It's usually not a good idea. And sometimes people do it, they get mad at their boss and they say, "That's it, I'm walking." And sometimes calmer heads prevail and they say, "Well, maybe I shouldn't have done that." And I imagine these disciples, sometimes art is a little mistaken about how things. Have you ever seen a picture of the Last Supper where Jesus is there and his disciples? Even Da Vinci had it wrong. When you look at Jesus' disciples, you know what they look like? Old men. They were more likely, 18 to 25, young men. And they leave this thing, and we don't know that much about them. We know the brothers, the 2 sets of brothers here. The one thing is, and we do know something about Peter. Do you know what he was married? I wonder what it was like when Peter went back and told his wife, "I quit my job, and I'm going to follow this guy, Jesus." Do you know one of the people at the early service came up to me, Donna Wilson, she showed me on her phone, she just got a blog from somebody, one of her friends, it was from a woman friend of hers, obviously, and the blog read like this: "In every marriage, there are 2 opinions, the right one and the husband's." And just think about that. In every marriage there are 2 opinions, the right one and the husband's. And there's a lot of smiles, about half smiles out there and half puzzled looks when I looked out at the congregation. But I can imagine what Peter walks home and he says, the whole fishing business, I'm taking a break, and I'm going to follow this guy, Jesus. I imagine the question is, you're doing what? Are there days off? Are you going to be home every night? No, no, no. What are you doing? Do you know, it's interesting though, when you read on in the first chapter of Mark, one of the first miracles Jesus does, and do you know what he does? He goes to Peter's house, and you know who's sick at Peter's house? His mother-in-law. She has a terrible fever, she can't get out of bed, and she's burning up. And you know what Jesus goes and does for his mother-in-law? He walks into her and heals her. And then she gets up and starts moving around. You know, Jesus knows your every personal situation. I bet Jesus knew Peter's marriage situation. And you know, how do you get your wife, Peter's wife, happy? You heal her mother. All right, you can go. You can go. You can follow Jesus. You can go out. You can go on the road with him. You can trust him. You can listen to him. Because you know what? Certainly this guy is the Son of God. Or he's somebody special. And you know what? That's what Jesus says. He says, follow me. Trust me. And you know, these disciples, you know, they saw Jesus at extremes. They saw him in incredible glory because three of these, Peter, James, and John, went up with Jesus. You know, and that's our gospel reading a couple weeks from now. The last Sunday, the Epiphany is known as the Bible passage is known as the Transfiguration. Jesus goes up on this mountaintop to pray with those three disciples, and he gets transfigured. He shines. Moses and Elijah come and speak to him, and Peter says, wow, glad we're here. Let me put up shelters. Let's just stay up here. And then even God the Father speaks from heaven and said, this is my Son. Listen to him. And you know, that's just what Peter, Andrew, James, and John did. They followed Jesus and they listened to him. They trusted him. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? A big part of it is just following Jesus in faith. Do you know, Jesus doesn't ask you to quit your job and give up everything. Although, you know, we did have something last night. It was a sort of a special night here last night. We had an ordination. We had Kurt up there at the sound, and Bill, who's pastoring now over at West Campus. If you look at the bulletin, they used to be vicars. And actually now they're pastors. Sort of a celebration. And, you know, doing that. In many ways, that's, you know, actually what they're doing is they're quitting their jobs and they're going into full-time church work. Which is a little bit like Peter, James, John, and Andrew did. They dropped their nets and they followed Jesus. But for the majority of us here, you don't quit your jobs. But all the same, God in Christ Jesus says, follow me. Live out your faith wherever you are. Proclaim the wonder and the grace that Jesus brings. And you know what? It's incredible. It's incredible. And sometimes people have a hard time fathoming, thinking, how could Jesus do all these things? Do you know, I wonder if somebody doubted Jesus, you know, fishermen. Fishermen tell tall tales. Dr. Larson here, he's a fisherman. Do you ever tell a tall tale? Or pretty much? The one that got away, right? All the big ones get away. Do you know, I remember the story thinking about fishermen. I remember hearing a story about two fishermen who were known for their tall tales, and one went to the other and they were bragging about what they've caught, and then one said, you wouldn't believe what I caught last week. A 25-foot catfish. It was longer than my boat, but I got it in. And the other guy said, well, I can top that. I was fishing out on the ocean, and I hooked a lamp from the Civil War, and it was still burning. And the guy with the 25-foot catfish says, all right, why don't we bring this to reason? I'll take 10 foot off my catfish if you take the flame off your lamp. I wonder if people doubt it. You know, there are people who doubt when they hear the wonderful, incredible things that Jesus has done. But the one thing that Jesus says, test me, follow me, listen to me, and trust me. And do you know what? People have been doing that for hundreds of centuries and millennia. And do you know what? Jesus keeps his promises. Do you know these disciples? Most of them were martyred for their faith. They'd rather die than deny the incredible message and joy that Jesus gave. You know, John was the only one of the 12 who didn't die more or less a martyr's death. And he lived to be an old man and wrote the book of Revelation late in life. But when Jesus said, follow me, he said, I'm going to follow you all the days of my life and bring glory to you. He made them fishers of men. And when we think about being fishing, you know, casting nets. Do you know that the disciples, I think, were a little bit torn? And I remember one of my favorite passages when I think about, when I read this, I think about John chapter 20. And it's after Jesus was crucified and he rose from the grave and they were just waiting around. They didn't see him. So what did these disciples, you know, when you don't know what to do, you do something you're familiar with. The disciples went fishing. And they're out in a boat, they're fishing with nets. They fished all night long, and what did they catch? Nothing. And Jesus called out from the shore from a distance, hey, have you guys caught any? Have you ever done that on a pier? You walk up to somebody, hey, what have you caught? I always like doing that. And sometimes they say, nothing. But in this account in John, Jesus says, throw the net on the other side of the boat. Do you know that's the key to fishing? You know, if one side of the boat is bad, the other side of the boat has got to be better, right? No? Bryce, you said no? What's bad is bad. But not with Jesus. He makes the bad good. And you know what? They threw the net on the other side of the boat, and what happened? They caught so many fish, the net started ripping, and started pulling it out of the water. And then Peter looked in a distance from the boat, 100 yards to shore, and squinted and said, that's Jesus. And he jumped in the water and swam to him. That's following Jesus. Being ready to get out of the boat. And those disciples were reminded what Jesus said on this day. You know what? You're not going to be fishers of fish. You're going to be fishers of men. The message and the grace and the love of Jesus